Hello, friends and viewers of this esteemed gathering, an extremely topical issue that we've been discussing. In the last about 2 to 3 years, we've seen a lot of activity in the space sector, whether it be satellite communications or any aspects of remote sensing, geospatial, and the like. For the longest time, there has been a demand from within the industry that there needed to be some amount of clarity in the policy regime surrounding this particular sector, because as we all know, India is extremely proud to have had such a great space program, run by and operated by the ISRO. But over a period of time, there was a need for the development of the commercial space sector. And that really required some rules and regulations to be set out, along with some clarity thereon to guide the business and the commercial decisions of entities who wanted to get into this sector, whether those be within the country or from overseas, and also look at developing this sector at par with any other such commercial space sector in any part of the world. Today, what we are going to discuss is, in light of this demand for the policy initiatives, the changes that have come about, beginning with the Honorable Finance Minister's statement just around May, June of 2020, that the space sector is going to be given a huge fillip and there will be updated policies, possibly a legislation on the anvil, and a relook at the various aspects of investments in this sector. We've had a whole host of changes, developments that have taken place over the last 3 or 3.5 years. And these are culminating now in creating an environment where there is already a growth that is witnessed in this particular area. And to my mind, this is just the beginning. And we look forward to having this, the dream realized of putting the commercial space sector of India also on the world map. So with that, we have a great panel today. We have Mr. R.S. Sharma, who's the former chairman of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. We have Mr. Ajay Kumar, who's the former Secretary of Defense. And we have General Anil Bhatt, who is the DG of the Indian Space Association. This is one of the leading associations in relation to the space sector, committed to the development of commercial and policy level space aspects in the country. So without further ado, I'd like to begin this session with an overarching a look at what this sector is and what we can expect from the point of view of policy, from the point of view of government, and most importantly, very recently we all know that we've got the telecommunications bill, which has been converted into an act of parliament. So what kind of enabling provisions, what kind of policy guidelines have been created through the Telecommunication Act and otherwise that will really give a fillip to this industry in India?
Yeah, thank you very much, Abhishek. I think I will be limiting myself to the issues of satellite communication, space communication particularly. Of course, there are many other areas of space which I'm not familiar with, and probably General Bhatt will be able to throw some light on them. But as a chairman of TRAI for a period of 5 years, starting from August 2015 to September 2020, I have had the occasion to look into the communication sector as such. And I found that we had huge potentialities in the space satellite communication, which were actually unexplored. We also noted that there are many areas in the country where the terrestrial communication systems like fiber, optical fiber, etc., they have not reached, especially in the northeastern areas and the Andaman Nicobars and Lakshadweep. Fortunately, the government has made tremendous strides in that part. Also, now you have Lakshadweep, fiber, and you have Andaman fiber, and but still it is very difficult to lay down fiber in the hilly areas and difficult terrains. And I have always been advocating that we should have, we should use all means of technology to reach our people and make communication affordable to them. And one I remember one particular sort of interesting factoid, which is that the satellite data charges at that point of time was 400 times larger than the what it is in the worldwide in America and other places. So it's very, while our data is 100 times cheaper when it comes to normal data in the telecommunication sector. So imagine we now have data at 7 rupees per gigabyte compared to United States $12.35 per gigabyte. But on the other hand, the space data charges were extremely high. And these were high because of the kind of policy regime which we had been having for so many years. And all the entities, industry bodies like Indian Space Association, also Satellite Satcom Association, etc., they have all been advocating liberalization of the space policy, which will make it possible to actually leverage the benefits of space communication to the Indian people. And I'm so happy to see the new provisions in the Indian Telecom Act, which has recently been passed by our parliament, where they have liberalized the policy, so much so that the Isro, which was actually the main channelizing agency prior to this particular act, has now been sort of this whole sector has become liberalized, and now you have Inspace Communication, which is also one of the agencies which will participate in the process. So I expect a tremendous amount of boom in the space communication sector in the near future, especially the foreign direct investment. There are a lot of global players who are there in this sector. They will also join in. And therefore, overall, the availability of communication and its rate and its accessibility and its ubiquitousness will increase tremendously. And as you know, communication systems are extremely important in our Digital India program, whereby people transact. Telecom is not, voice is only one of the small parts of the communication system. Now we have all kinds of applications, whether it is financial inclusion, whether it is other applications which are riding on the telecommunication networks. And that will become very easy for our people who are hitherto not very in a very advantageous position because of the lack of terrestrial communication systems going to them. So I am extremely happy, and I must compliment and congratulate our Honorable Minister of Communications, who has taken such very positive and very transformational steps, which will open up and which will actually unleash the energy which was there latent in this sector.
Thank you so much for that, sir. And I quite echo your sentiments that some amount of policy push is always required for any industry to prosper. And I think this is very timely that with the Telecommunications Act that we are likely to see this sector version into something which we are all looking forward to be part of. General Bhatt, moving to you, in this climate that has been created by the policy, there is a need for something more to be done, especially because of the fact that this is such a capital intensive sector. And for the longest time, we've had the players in India largely performing like a downstream role and being partners to Isro and the space program. But so what, according to you, because you're Director General of the Indian Space Association, and I'm sure you have tremendous amount of experience in these in what I'm about to just put to you. But what really are the initiatives apart from the legislative and the pure policy level aspects that are being carried out either at the government level or within the industry to really give that heads up to the sector so as to be able to compete at the international level?
The government, like you mentioned, it is a historical decision. When they decided to open this strategic sector, to private players. It was looking at things in the future, looking at opportunities, taking risks in where dual technology is there and static sector is affected. And what has happened in April, the space policy we've got better than what anybody in the private sector would have asked. It allows private players to be in every domain of space, be it communication, be it navigation, be PNT, be it remote sensing. Even it allows private players to do asteroid mining, to explore space. So everything possible what is in space is allowed by the new space policy. To add on to that, of course, this is the first step. And the next step, which is round the corner, is FDI. A liberal FDI, because funds are very important for the sector. And we are looking at not only funds which are from the government, which are from the country, we also are looking at funds from outside, because that funds will also bring technology. It will also give us, our space sector, a bigger market, which is international. The third issue is, which is also, the FDI also, the policy has been discussed with us by Inspace and by the Department of Space, and a liberal policy is just wrong. We're just waiting for it. It would be aligned with what is the policy in the Department of Telecommunication, which is nearly 100% FDI by direct route, and in defense, which is about 74% by direct route now, which in steps got liberalized from 26 to 70%. The third thing is, of course, in the long run, we look at a space activity bill, because that would put on regulations and, more importantly, identify a regulator, and liability, which is a very important domain in space, that would also. But if you ask me what is the ask of the industry today from the government, apart from FDI, is a number of incentives which are required, which are given to other industries. GST, which is lower, tax holidays, capital subsidies, creation of SGZs. All these things will be required to be done in this very capital incentive sector, that we become global players. That we do not only have space, our private companies, for India, but they are suppliers for the world. And a very liberal decision has been taken, the telecommunication bill, and I should emphasize on it, that allowing administrative allocation of spectrum to space has been a very significant decision this government has taken. This will allow this nascent sector to grow. And here I should compliment Mr. Sharma and the organization which he had headed, TRAI. The kind of discussions they have had and the strength that organization has to have open-ended 360-degree discussion on, which helped the government to take very valuable decisions. It really helped. And we are so very happy for this decision, which is globally harmonized and taken by the government.
So my next question is actually to Mr. Ajay Kumar. Sir, given your vast experience with the defense sector, I specifically wanted your views on how you see the interplay of commercial space with the requirements of the defense, specifically with this often raised issue of security and lack of being provided access to a certain amount of spectrum on account of defense usage or security. So your views on how that will play out in the near future once more and more private companies come into this realm.
Thank you, Abhishek. I think you raise a very important point. We must realize that security of the nation is paramount. There is no nation if there is no security. And therefore, when it comes to security, we have to meet the spectrum requirements of the security, whether it is the armed forces or whether it is the police forces or any other security needs. Having said that, it's also equally important that we use our spectrum extremely efficiently. There is absolutely no reason that the spectrum should not be used in a manner which provides its optimal usage. And therefore, while ensuring that the requirements of security forces is met, we also need to ensure that the requirements of the civil and commercial applications is adequately met. Given the way the future technology is moving forward, the way we are seeing that low Earth orbit satellites have transformed the communication field, one can foresee that in the coming days, there will be increasing demand for spectrum by satellite communication. And for that, we may have to make adjustments. Having worked in defense, I can tell you that in the past also, when the requirements of 3G came, when the requirements of 4G came, when the requirements of 5G came, the armed forces have, and the defense ministry has always been looking to find good solutions, optimal solutions, efficient solutions for meeting the national requirements as well as meeting the requirements of the defense forces. Sometimes what happens because of the legacy, the way the spectrum has been allocated in the past, defense forces have equipment which works in the range which is now required for a particular application. And in those cases, these legacy issues need to be resolved. We may have to move from one spectrum to another. And this causes a certain difficulty in the transition. There is cost involved in it. Equipment which may have been installed based on a certain frequency range may suddenly become either inoperative or may need to be readjusted and retuned based on the new set of frequency ranges. Sometimes there are issues of frequency bandwidth. Sometimes there are interoperability issues with other applications and other systems that are operating. But there has never been a case where a national requirement has been compromised for want of adjustment in terms of spectrum. So I am confident that as India moves onto this journey of greater satellite and space usage for various applications, communication, development, security, an amicable solution can be found out in this regard. Thank you.
Mr. Sharma, I just wanted to, I'm taking a point from what General Bhatt mentioned with regard to the initiatives and the need of the hour, etc. And because of the fact that you have overseen a kind of the regulators' perspective in the telecom sector for the 5-year period, the one perhaps takeaway in relation to how the sector may be regulated. That's number one. Number two is the connected aspect of how you feel that we are going to be able to achieve the ease of doing business from an FDI point of view. Like, for example, right now, initially when there was the FDI policy was revised in 2020, it was supposed to be allowing in the SATCOM sector about it was increased to 100%, but of course through the approval route, it was increased from 49% to 100% as per press note 4 of 2021. And of course, the chairman of Inspace, Mr. Pawan Goenka, has also been quoted to say that he would like it to be taken up to 74%, 100% in certain cases. But in this entire scenario, what would, sir, your recommendation be in relation to what people can look forward to from the point of view of FDI and from the point of view of regulation?
So I think let me first, I say that I fully agree with the assessment of General Bhatt about the capital intensive nature of this industry and the kind of infrastructure which will have to be put in place to leverage and to really take advantage of the new policy regime. I certainly concur with him, and my own wish will be to allow a complete 100% sort of FDI in this sector. I don't see any harm in that, especially when we have opened up the FDI is only a part of the entire phenomenon of investment in a particular area. the more important part is also the policy regime, which is so liberalized now. So I think that is something which everyone will wish now. The other part, which is extremely important from the perspective of spectrum allocation, is the administrative policy, administrative allocation policy, and why it is important. People just don't understand. People think that because of the Honorable Supreme Court's order that every spectrum or every natural resource must be auctioned, must be allocated through a transparent auction process. That kind of interpretation people give, though the Honorable Supreme Court's directive is that every process which is employed in allocation of a spectrum must be transparent. So that transparency is the basic feature. Now, there could be something which is auctionable, there could be something which is non-auctionable. So satellite communication or satellite, sort of a spectrum need is point to point. It's point A of the Earth to point B in the satellite, and then that point may keep on shifting depending on the sort of orientation, etc., and other technical factors. So essentially, if you can't have an area-based or a spectrum-based, bandwidth-based allocation policy based on auction, because once you auction, then everybody else who is going to use it becomes one of the sub auctioneer or sub allottees or whatever. So that's not feasible in a space situation. It's feasible in a terrestrial kind of bandwidth situation. So I think that is something which we had been emphasizing, which, I mean, when I say we, I am talking about TRAI has been emphasizing to the Department of Telecommunication that this is just not feasible and possible to have a policy of auction in a situation when in a smaller area you can have millions of pencils pointing to the millions of other points. So there's no sense. Auction doesn't make any sense in that part. So that's one part. Secondly, with regard to the kind of other policy, Philip, and other actionable points which have to happen in order to realize the full benefit of the new policy regime, I think everybody will have to work together to ensure that things are implemented in a right direction. And I think both telecommunication, the broadcasting sector, and the broadcasting includes both television broadcasting as also the FM and other kinds of frequency based broadcasting system, the terrestrial television also. So I think there will be huge amount of, and of course we also need sharing of the infrastructure, because the sharing of telecommunication towers was actually a very unique Indian experience, and that experience is now being replicated worldwide. Similarly, what we need is sharing of the infrastructure at the ground level by multiple agencies, and that should be enabled by the by the policy regime. Like we have enabled the sharing of frequencies, trading of frequencies. Similarly, I think these kinds of liberal sort of approaches must be employed in the space sector also. So I think that's what we are looking forward to, and I think India has done tremendous amount of work in multiple areas, both in the space and communications and geospatial, the remote sensing. Wonderful work has been done. But now what is required is the private agencies must also come forward and do the same amount of work. It should not be limited to, and one of the beautiful policy, the space policy, the geospatial policy, which has been brought out to the government of India in December of 2022, is also very, very, what do you say, very transformational, in the sense that it says that whatever has been collected by the public funds must be made available to public. And that will basically ensure a huge development of industry. So actually the space sort of liberalization will not only result in better communication systems, better this thing, it will also result in huge amount of startups coming forward, huge amount of industry developing in this sector. So it's a very, very positive development which has happened.
No, I agree with you, sir. In fact, one of the very recent announcements that was made, if I'm not mistaken, earlier this week on Monday, was that the Inspace announced this new seed fund scheme, where they are going to be allocating some seed funds for startups that in areas of urban development and disaster management. using space technology, and including giving them access to some data, technology transfer, etc. So I quite agree with you. These are the inputs that are required for any new sector to burgeon, and specifically the the agreed aspect of it being a capital intensive sector and requiring this kind of push and the fillip from the government. These are the aspects that are really required to be able to achieve that particular goal. One last comment that I'd like to get from General Bhatt. Given the fact that there is some amount of reportage, etc., across the world in relation to the fact that sometimes disputes could really create an issue in any kind of sector, and specifically in relation to the space sector because of the impact that it kind of creates. Would you agree that perhaps self-regulation can be looked at as perhaps an option to be provided in case because of the uncertainty that attaches to this particular sector, and in the absence of let's say an adjudicatory body in the meanwhile, how do you think that we can perhaps try and resolve these disputes in the near future? Perhaps this aspect, and maybe the connected issue, if you have some thoughts of the aspect of how to limit liability, etc., because that's going to be one of the aspects that any business person or any investor, when they come to invest in any sector, these are the thoughts that will come to their mind, and this is what they want resolution for. So may I get your views on those aspects, sir?
So Abhishek, very rightly, as I said, in the future, and definitely a draft is being made ready for that in the Department of Space, is a space activity bill. And what will it address is these gaps. Two major gaps. One is providing from an act of parliament powers to Inspace, which has been created as a promoter and as a regulator presently. But yes, we always say that promotion and regulation should be two separate agencies. And that is one thing the government may have to look in the future. Like I said, we have had a very excellent model in the Department of Telecommunication, TRAI. There couldn't be a better model of how regulators can be created and perform. We have this model to follow, and definitely something like this will have to be done. Who takes it on? Does Inspace take it on, or another agency is made? That is the decision the government will have to take. But the more important issue of liability. Liability is a commitment in space by international law. And, the countries are following the general model. What is being followed by most of the country is, to an extent, to a limit, it is paid by whoever is the launch oblique satellite service provider. Say it may be 60 billion per satellite or whatever, like in UK, in USA, in Australia. And beyond that, if there is a larger liability, that is a sovereign responsibility. I think that is what model the Department of Space and Space is also moving in India. I'm not aware of what is the amount they have laid for a liability by individual companies, but they'll have to be laid out. There's another model in India which is very successful in the nuclear domain, and that is a pool. They have a insurance pool for nuclear disaster, and similarly they can have a space insurance. That option is also available. That as premium money is given, and some money in this is already given by the government, that there is a fund available to look after the liability part of insurance. But what I get a sense presently it is, we will maybe follow the model which USA, UK, and many countries are following, a limit till which it will be a responsibility of the industry. And beyond that, if it is very large, it will be a sovereign responsibility.
Coming back to Mr. Ajay Kumar, sir, I had asked you about the your views on how the interplay of the defense and the space sector is likely to evolve. You've given a great your inputs on that. Just wanted to ask, and this is more, of course, less of a commercial sort of question, more of a strategic question. Increasingly, to my mind, space is likely to be used as maybe the next level, the next area of either cooperation or conflict. the defense capabilities of any country are likely to be needed to be upgraded or have a more focused approach towards space and communications and remote sensing, etc. So how do you see the possibility of private players to enter this area, this domain, and to work alongside the government to be able to achieve not just their personal commercial interests, but the larger national interest for the country?
Yes, thank you again, Abhishek. I think, again, you make a very wonderful point. And let me answer this question with a small history of what should be the role of private sector versus what should be the role of public sector. Way back in the 1870s and 1880s, when US was still not the leading country in technology, US War and Navy Department, and that time a lot of defense was naval, the US War and Navy Department used to source most of its armaments and arsenal from government factories that were there. But it was also true that the European defense industry had advanced much more than America, and America was not the leader in terms of defense technologies. Then came the era in around 1880s when the wooden and sail-based ships, naval vessels, started giving way to steel and steam-based vessels. And at that stage, the US government and the US armed forces were faced with this big question that they would either have to allow their private industry to start making these new kind of vessels, because the government naval yards were not capable of doing this in quick time, or they had to import from Europe to a much larger extent. And the US at that time took the decision to start sourcing from their private industry. And if I may say, rest is history. Of course, the industry started making things which were required for the Navy, but at the same time, because they realized that they had now to compete with their European counterparts, they also started making big advancements in technology so that they could compete and excel them. So this is one historical fact which shows how important the role of private industry has been in defense over the centuries. Today, of course, if you look at most of the Western world, private sector enjoys the prime place in the defense industry ecosystem. In the last few years, we have also realized that if we can be buying from private foreign vendors, there is absolutely no reason why we should not be buying from our own private industry, and government has been encouraging the entry of private sector in defense. Parallelly, as you know, in 2021, a big decision was taken to open the space sector to the private industry and to create a level playing field for the space sector. Inspace has been formed, which ensures that the existing public sector infrastructure, testing capabilities, launch infrastructure, etc., is also made available to the new nascent coming up private sector. This has really resulted in a large number of private industries who have started venturing into this. And particularly remarkable has been the entry of startups. We have already seen how the startups have already started creating various components of the space ecosystem, whether it is the satellites, whether it is the payloads on the satellites, whether it is launch vehicles, whether it is the ground stations, and whether it is the analytical platforms or any other component that goes on along with the space ecosystem. We in defense actually recognize this reality very soon. And in 2022, we use the IDEX platform, which is the platform for innovation in defense for excellence, which had been very effective in creating an innovative ecosystem in defense. We decided to specifically launch IDEX challenges in space sector. And there, particularly because space sector, IDEX typically was funding low cost projects, and space very often when you're looking at launch and we're looking at satellites is sometimes higher cost. We created a system of challenges which were enmeshed with each other. That is, if the end result is to be a satellite, which would be a costly thing, this was converted into 2-tier or 3-tier challenges, where at the lower end, the startup was required to reach a particular first stage of the whole product. And then the second challenge, follow-up challenge, which will reach to stage 2 and stage 3. 75 challenges were launched by Honorable Prime Minister in October 2022. And I must say that the startup ecosystem has responded wonderfully well. Till now, most of the startup defense requirements for satellite-based space were being either met through DRDO or through Isro, depending on what the requirement was. But with this now, a clear roadmap of how to bring in private sector for defense requirements has been created. And we are already seeing number of new capabilities that have been created within the defense forces with respect to how their ability to analyze images that they receive from satellites of very high capability resolution, image matching, creating specific payloads. In fact, as possibly you know, one of our startups in IIT Delhi is today servicing not only requirements of Indian defense, but also NASA requirements. And therefore, several of our startups who have come up in the space sector who are serving Indian defense are today world-class capability. The advantage here is when we have opened up the private sector, the scale at which the solutions are coming is much faster. The speed at which the solutions are coming are much faster. And the cost at which the solutions is coming is much lower. As you very rightly said, in coming years, space is going to be an important frontier of conflict in multiple ways. Every country will need to defend its space assets, and it will also need to have capabilities to deter any adverse impact which others may try to create. In this context, Indian Defense Forces, Indian defense ecosystem has to create a wide range of capabilities. To my mind, this kind of capability set can only be created with the active participation and enablement of the private industry and the startup ecosystem. We are already seeing the early results of having opened up this ecosystem. And I only look forward to really seeing this results blossom into giving concrete outputs for us. Let me just conclude by saying even in the US, the space sector for a long time remained the monopoly of government through NASA. But about 2 decades back, or less than 2 decades back, the space ecosystem was opened up. SpaceX entered the fray. And today we all know how it has transformed the whole space ecosystem, even in the world. The number of satellites which SpaceX has been able to put up under their OneWeb, they already have more than 5,000 satellites. They are going to have 12,000 and eventually 40,000 satellites in the orbit, covering every nook and corner of the Earth. This is the scale and speed which is possible. And I think India has an opportunity with the help of its industry, its startups, and a very important role which Isro also is playing. In the combined strengths of all of this can help us actually to take our rightful place in the space ecosystem for our defense requirements, for our armed forces requirements, as well as for our civil and commercial requirements. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to all the esteemed panelists for such a great insight into this extremely interesting and developing area of business, of strategy, of immense national importance for the country. I specifically wanted to thank once again Mr. R. Sharma for his insights from a telecom perspective and a policy perspective. Mr. Ajay Kumar for bringing in the extremely relevant and current aspects of how the interplay of defense and the space sector can sort of work together, and General Bhatt for insightful, specific, and industry-oriented inputs in relation to this space sector and what we can do to further the development and the growth of this sector. Thank you so very much to the organizers as well for putting up such a great event, and I look forward to more such incisive discussions in the near future. Thank you.